Darkness. I felt a weight pressing down on me, like sleep paralysis. I couldn't fight back. Not only that, but an intimate pressure touched my lips. I wanted to struggle, but I was completely immobilized. The scent was faintly of sea breeze. Suddenly, I felt a fine, prickly stubble against my skin. My heart lurched. A man. During my junior year of college, I met the Sterling sisters, Claire and Sophie. They were freshmen back then, and I was the RA assigned to their dorm floor. The first time I saw them, they caught my eye immediately. They were practically identical, tall, poised, and elegant. They sat in the second row, right in front of me, during the orientation meeting. My phone number was written on the whiteboard by the resident director. "This is your RA, Caleb Hayes," he announced. "If you run into any problems on campus, he's the guy who can sort it out for you. If you run into trouble anywhere within a 5-mile radius of campus, he can handle that too. Don't let the quiet exterior fool you." The director went on, hyping me up to the new students. It was getting embarrassing. I saw both sisters furrow their brows. At the time, they both gave off a distinct keep-your-distance vibe. It was only after I got to know them that I realized how different they were. The older sister, Claire, was cool and reserved. The younger one, Sophie, was bubbly and a little mischievous. They were like a landmark on campus. Plenty of guys had ideas about them. Of course, that didn't include me. I appreciated beautiful women, but I had no intention of bothering them. One day, I was helping a freshman deal with a delinquent payday loan. He had used his student ID and social security number to borrow $5,000 from a shady online lender to buy a new phone. The terms were predatory, with an insane APR spread over 6 payments. He was only 3 days late, but the off-campus collectors were already threatening him. Back then, those kinds of loan apps were a plague. There were at least 7 or 8 of them circling the university, using students to promote their services on campus for a $300 commission per sign-up. The freshman was terrified and went to the resident director, who, after hearing the story, punted him directly to me. Luckily, I know a lot of people. The guy on the other end gave me some professional courtesy and extended the deadline by 3 months. He even slipped me a carton of Marlboros for my trouble. To show his gratitude, the freshman insisted on buying me dinner. That evening, the streets were crowded. The downtown food truck park was lit up with string lights, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and roasted nuts. The freshman and I had just sat down at a picnic table when I saw them. Claire and Sophie. The sisters were walking side by side. I couldn't count how many times guys tried to talk to them on their way over. But they kept their eyes forward, their pace steady. Finally, a group of guys blocked their path. I recognized the leader, a guy from the neighboring college. He'd graduated last year and had been running a backroom poker game nearby ever since, an illegal one. He also offered small-time loans under $5,000, preying on the gambling addicts from the local universities. The guys with him were either his old college buddies or local townies. They surrounded the sisters, their voices loud, their enthusiasm aggressive and unwelcome. Other students passing by gave them a wide berth. No one wanted that kind of trouble. I didn't want to get involved either, but the thought of them being from my dorm, my responsibility, made me stand up. "Claire, Sophie," I said, my tone casual, as if we were old friends. "I've been waiting for you. Come on, our table's over here." The leader saw me and grinned. "Yo, Caleb, fancy seeing you here." I nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. "Rhino, you're looking sharper than ever." He glanced at me, then at the two sisters. "Dame, son, you work fast." We exchanged a few more lines of meaningless banter, and Rhino got ready to leave. After all, I wasn't about to offer him a seat. His buddies hesitated, looking between me, Rhino, and the girls, before shuffling away awkwardly. After Rhino and his crew left, the tense atmosphere finally dissipated. I politely asked the sisters if they wanted to join us. To my surprise, Sophie immediately said yes. That was the day we all formally met. Claire and Sophie came from a wealthy family, but they never had that spoiled heiress attitude. Being around them was easy. We'd occasionally run into each other at the library and exchange a nod and a smile, or chat for a few minutes on the way back from class. They maintained a perfectly polite distance with me, their RA. The familiarity from that first rescue seemed to end there. Until that afternoon. Sophie came to find me. She stood in my doorway, sunlight haloing her, but her expression was troubled. "Caleb, you got a minute?" Her voice was soft, not its usual cheerful tone. I invited her in. She hesitated before speaking. "Caleb, can you do me a favor?" She told me about an international student in their class, Kenji Tanaka. According to her, this Japanese student had been showing an excessive amount of enthusiasm towards the sisters, especially Claire. At first, it was just awkward attempts at conversation in heavily accented English between classes. Then it escalated to coincidentally running into them at the study hall they frequented. Recently, he had started posting vague, somewhat suggestive sentences on public campus social media pages, always tagging them. My sister thinks we should just ignore him, but he doesn't seem to understand what backing off means, Sophie said with a slight frown. We've rejected him clearly, but he just smiles and says he just wants to be friends and that in Japan, this is a very normal, friendly gesture. We're a little unsure of the best way to handle it. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear the anxiety beneath her frustration. It was a delicate situation involving someone from another country. If mishandled, it could easily lead to unnecessary misunderstandings or worse. I thought for a moment, not wanting to make any grand promises. I just nodded. I get it. Leave it to me. For now, try to avoid being alone with him. The next day, I found my opportunity. I gathered a few friends I could count on. In the alley behind the campus computer lab, we extended a warm welcome to him. We asked him if he was keeping up with his classes, if he was adjusting to life here. Kenji Tanaka was a smart guy. Even though he couldn't see our faces clearly, he felt our concern for him. He thanked us profusely, using very polite language. After that, he spent 3 days contemplating his life choices in his dorm room. The problem was solved quietly. When Sophie saw me next, her smile was noticeably more genuine. Sometimes she'd save me a seat in the library or bring me a cold bottle of soda. Claire remained reserved, but when she nodded hello, the distance in her eyes had thawed a little. Come on, Caleb, one more. Sophie's voice pulled me back from my memories. She was holding a shot glass, looking at me intently. I really couldn't drink anymore. I had just gotten back from a 3-year stint overseas, and they had picked me up straight from the airport. They insisted on throwing me a welcome home party. It was too much. I hadn't even gotten over the jet lag, and we started drinking the moment we sat down. My head was spinning. It was unsettling. I never would have guessed that Sophie, fresh out of college, could drink like this. I really can't, I said, waving my hand, feeling a throb in my temples. Anymore, and I won't be able to get up tomorrow. Sophie's lips curled into a sly smile. Come on, Caleb, it's the last one. This is what you get for running off to grad school abroad without a word and staying for 3 years. She was wearing a black slip dress tonight, her skin looking as white as snow against the fabric. Her long, slightly curled hair was draped over her shoulders. She had shed her collegiate innocence for a certain indescribable allure. I reluctantly took the glass, the cold touch shocking me into a bit more clarity. My eyes subconsciously flickered to Claire, sitting across from her. She hadn't been pushing drinks on me, just occasionally looking up at me and her sister with a faint smile playing on her lips. Sis, say something, Sophie said, turning to her sister. Are you just going to let Caleb off the hook this easily? Claire smiled faintly, stood up, and winked at Sophie. You two chat. I'm going to step out and take a call. Sophie stealthily got up and closed the private room door. She leaned across the table, her hands braced on the surface, her voice soft. Caleb, are you leaving again this time? The black slip dress instantly outlined her magnificent figure. The deep neckline offered an unobstructed view of pale white. I glanced twice before awkwardly turning my head away. No, I'm not, I stammered. Sophie seemed pleased with my reaction. She let out a soft laugh and sat back down, her fingers toying with her glass. Good. Her eyes were sparkling. Before I could reply, my vision went black. I slumped forward onto the table. I don't know how long I was out. In the darkness, I suddenly felt a weight on me like sleep paralysis. I couldn't fight back. Not only that, but a moist, intimate pressure on my lips. I wanted to struggle, but the kiss held me down. A faint scent of sea breeze. Suddenly, I felt a fine, prickly stubble. My heart lurched. A man? The moment I realized I might be getting assaulted by a man, my whole body tensed. My mind snapped into focus. But an overwhelming exhaustion pulled me back under, and I passed out again. I opened my eyes. I was in an unfamiliar room, like a hotel suite. A wave of fatigue washed over my body. Suddenly remembering something, I shot up in bed. I forced myself to calm down, examining the king-size bed like a detective. The pillows were a bit messy, but other than that, everything seemed normal. I got down on my hands and knees to check the sheets, but found nothing. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection, checking my body over and over. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I let out a small sigh of relief. Maybe I'd just been too tired lately, my mind playing tricks on me. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face. As the droplets slid down my cheeks, the man in the mirror stared back, his eyes bloodshot from the hangover, but his features were sharp, his jawline clean and defined. After showering, I slicked my wet hair back. The movement pulled my shirt tight, revealing a lean torso in the mirror. Pecs, abs, V-lines. The clear results of a disciplined lifestyle. I shook my head with a bitter smile, feeling foolish for my absurd thoughts moments earlier. After one last check, I got dressed and walked out of the bathroom. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen read, Sophie. I answered, trying to make my voice sound normal. Sophie, Caleb, you're awake? Her voice was cheerful, as bright as ever. Sleep well? Does your head still hurt? I'm okay, just a little fuzzy on the details, I said vaguely. Last night, did you guys bring me back to the hotel? Yep, my sister and I hauled your drunk ass back here, she laughed. Pretty strong, aren't we? Thanks, I said. I paused, then asked casually, I didn't act crazy or anything last night, did I? Or say anything weird in my sleep? There was a moment of silence on the other end. So brief, it was almost imperceptible. Nope, you slept like a log. We're waiting for you in the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Hurry down. My sister ordered you an Americano to wake you up. After hanging up, I stood in the middle of the room, looking around. After a moment's hesitation, I walked out the door. In the restaurant, breakfast was already served. The air was filled with the aroma of coffee and toast. Claire and Sophie were already seated by the window. Claire wore a cream-colored pantsuit, her long hair loosely tied up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She was looking down at her phone, her profile serene in the morning light. Sophie, on the other hand, was in a yellow tank top and denim shorts, her hair in a high ponytail and her face free of makeup. She looked just like the energetic college student she used to be, sipping on a glass of milk. Caleb, over here. Sophie saw me first and waved. I walked over and sat in the empty chair across from them. A dark Americano was placed in front of me, its rich aroma wafting up. Thanks. I picked up the cup and took a small sip. Did you sleep okay last night, Caleb? Claire looked up, her gaze calm as it met mine. Her tone was as light as ever, betraying no particular emotion. Yeah, Fine. Just a bit of a headache, I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. Thanks for all the trouble last night. I don't even remember how I got here. No trouble. Claire's lips curved into a very faint smile. You were more well-behaved than I expected. After breakfast, at Sophie's invitation, I submitted my resume to their company. It was a subsidiary of their father's corporate group, relatively independent. The sisters had been placed there to gain experience. The company wasn't large, only about 50 employees, but it was a strong performer in its field and had high standards for new hires. Fortunately, my resume and interview went well. I smoothly became a member of the team. On my first day, Sophie had her desk moved to be directly opposite mine. Every time I looked up, I saw her delicate face. Sophie's move was obviously intentional, but given our history and her status as one of the company's semi-owners, no one said anything. They just assumed it was a case of a senior looking out for his underclassmen. Caleb, looking forward to working with you, Sophie said with a radiant smile, placing a small money tree on the divider between our desks. A little green to block the radiation. Thanks, I nodded, turning on my computer to familiarize myself with the company's internal systems and business processes. I picked things up quickly. My role in market analysis required coordinating with multiple departments, and Sophie's operations department was a key partner. So, in addition to seeing each other across our desks all day, our work interactions became more and more frequent. She seemed to enjoy this arrangement, always full of enthusiasm when we discussed plans. Occasionally, she would lean over to look at the data on my screen, the ends of her hair brushing against my arm, carrying a faint, elusive fragrance. Claire was in the finance department, which was a bit more separate. After being there for a while, I started to feel that the company's vice president looked at me with a certain dissatisfaction. His name was Julian Vance. A few days later, I learned that he was the Sterling's adopted son, his grandfather and Mr. Sterling's father had been army buddies. Julian was the last of his family line and had lived with the Sterlings since he was a child. I heard that old Mr. Sterling had once promised to marry either Claire or Sophie to him, a sort of arranged engagement, or maybe a strategic alliance. But from the looks of it, neither sister seemed particularly interested in him. Although Julian carried a vague sense of hostility towards me, he was actually a decent guy and never deliberately made my work difficult. He was especially attentive to the sisters. Every day at noon, he would bring them homemade soup he'd prepared. The girls had refused many times, but he wouldn't listen, showing up rain or shine, tirelessly devoted. In less than 2 weeks on the job, I had already mooched off him no less than 10 times. I had to admit, his cooking was good enough to open a private restaurant that would be booked solid. I felt he would make an excellent stay-at-home husband someday. However, every time he saw me drinking his soup, the look he gave me was more like that of an impotent husband. Life settled into a predictable rhythm. The work in the marketing department was fulfilling and challenging, and I gradually began to distinguish myself on projects. But then, the company ran into trouble. The IRS called. There was a problem with the incoming invoices the company had received. We needed to cooperate with an investigation. If this turned into a full-blown audit, all the taxes we'd creatively avoided would come to light. The general manager was pacing like a cat on a hot tin roof, pulling strings everywhere, but couldn't find the right connection. The lead agent on the case was hesitant to make a call, afraid of being held responsible if something went wrong later. That afternoon, the calm was shattered. The head of the finance department came to me, his face grim, followed by two people in professional suits. Caleb Hayes, these two are from the IRS. They need to ask you a few questions. His voice was dry. The entire office went silent. All the whispers died down, and the sound of typing hung awkwardly in the air. I looked up and saw Sophie shoot up from her desk, her face etched with worry. Claire had also appeared nearby at some point. I took a deep breath and stood up. Okay, let's talk in the conference room. This situation, they wanted to discuss concerned a supplier contract I had handled after joining the company. The IRS had received a tip that a large number of invoices from this supplier were fraudulent. And sure enough, the supplier had been caught red-handed. Their CEO had already been taken into custody. The timing was too damn perfect. I had only been managing the account for a few days, and the first invoice I processed blew up. I suspected someone had set me up. The company provided a mountain of evidence to prove we were a bona fide purchaser, but the agents wouldn't let it go. They were determined to prove we had knowingly accepted the fraudulent invoices. If they succeeded, the company would not only face massive back taxes, late fees, and fines, but more importantly, our tax rating would be downgraded, severely impacting future operations. It would also be a permanent stain on my professional record. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I picked up my phone and made a call. That evening, I showed up at Wyatt O'Connell's house with 2 gift bags. Caleb, what is this? Dude, you're going to be the death of me. Before even letting me in, Wyatt took the bags from me and walked into the living room. Seriously? You used a premium whiskey gift box to hold fruit? And it's fucking tangerines. Wyatt lamented as he tore open the box, peeling a tangerine and popping it into his mouth. And you want my help with this? You show up with zero sincerity. He was complaining, but I knew he'd get it done. The current mayor was his older cousin. As the youngest grandson in his family, Wyatt was his grandfather's favorite. The old man had made Wyatt's parents quit their public service careers just so they could have a second child. As a result, his parents were indifferent to him, but he was showered with affection from his grandparents, aunts, and uncles. As the most spoiled screw-up in a family of beta testers for life's easy mode, a small matter like this was just a phone call for him. Leaving Wyatt's house, the night wind sobered me up a bit. I felt a little guilty for drinking half a bottle of his aged whiskey and then asking him for a favor. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Sophie. Caleb, are you okay? She asked, her voice urgent. The background was quiet. She probably wasn't at the office. It's fine. It's handled, I said concisely. I knew they were also trying to use the Sterling family's connections, but unfortunately, those contacts weren't in Westbridge and couldn't help on such short notice. The next day when I got to the office, the atmosphere was noticeably different. A message came from the IRS saying the case would be closed today. It was being treated as a bona fide purchase. We just had to pay the back taxes and late fees. The tax crisis seemed to be over, but a subtle, unspoken tension lingered in the office. The way Julian Vance looked at me now contained not just that vague hostility from before, but also a new layer of scrutiny and curiosity. He probably couldn't figure out how I'd pulled it off. If I told him that in this world, it's all about who you know, I wonder if he'd believe me. Sophie was much more direct. During the lunch break when the office was mostly empty, she slid her chair right up next to me, her eyes sparkling. It made me a little uncomfortable to look at her. After all, from my height, my vantage point was a prime viewing angle. Sophie's impressive assets were on full display, and my gaze would inevitably, helplessly, focus there. My body would protest. A D-cup anime figure was hard to handle. I started to miss the innocent and sweet Sophie from our college days. My gaze drifted past her and saw Claire coming out of the finance department. She was holding a file, and her eyes seemed to casually sweep over our area. Our gazes met for a second before she calmly looked away and headed towards Julian's office. Julian was standing at his office door, still holding that familiar thermos. He watched Claire approach, a gentle smile on his face as he handed it to her. Claire took it and said something softly. Julian nodded, but his eyes went over her shoulder and landed on me. So pathetic. Sophie followed my gaze and let out a soft tisk. She turned back to me and lowered her voice. Julian's a nice guy, but he just doesn't get it. He knows my sister isn't interested, but he won't stop pestering her. She paused, then suddenly leaned in closer. Caleb, what do you think of my sister? The abrupt question caught me off guard. I nearly choked on my tea. Her eyes were full of laughter. In the end, she unilaterally decided we were all going out to dinner that night to celebrate the successful resolution of the tax issue. Dinner was at a well-known private restaurant. The private room was quiet and elegant, the window looking out on the city's gradually illuminating neon lights. Sophie had clearly dressed up for the occasion, wearing a wine-red velvet gown that made her skin look like snow. She seemed determined to get me, the hero of the day, completely drunk. The appetizers hadn't even all arrived, and she had already toasted me several times. Claire sat beside her, eating quietly, a faint smile occasionally gracing her lips. She was also wearing a gown, a pale blue one that looked like a matching set with Sophie's, giving her a gentle and lovely appearance. I suddenly remembered that feeling from college, that flutter in my chest. As expected, the unexpected happened. Before I had even finished eating, a heavy wave of drowsiness washed over me. In a daze, that feeling of being pressed down came again, clearer than last time. It felt like someone was stroking my cheek, their fingers cool. The soft touch on my lips carried a familiar, light fragrance. I wanted to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were lined with lead. I wanted to lift my hand, but my body wouldn't obey. The kiss was gentle, yet insistent, possessive, aggressive. It was that same scent of sea breeze again, but without the prickly stubble from that night. I could relax. It wasn't a man. When I woke up again, my head was splitting. Familiar hotel room, familiar morning light seeping through the curtains. Suddenly, a touch against my body sent a jolt through me. I had woken up in Sophie Sterling's arms. She was wrapped around me like an octopus, her head buried in the crook of my neck, her breathing even. I shifted. Sophie immediately tightened her arms, murmuring, Caleb, let's sleep a little longer. Her leg casually draped over mine. My body went rigid. Blood rushed to my head, then plunged to my feet. Sophie's warm body was pressed tightly against mine. I could clearly feel the soft curves and heat of her. Images from the past flashed through my mind. My little brother gave a full-throated salute. I practically shot up, the movement so abrupt it startled Sophie awake. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and propped herself up lazily, a sly, triumphant smile on her face. Morning, Caleb. Her voice was husky from sleep, but her eyes were sharp and clear. I was at a loss for words, my mind a complete mess. My memory of last night ended at the restaurant, followed by the familiar blackout and that strange dream. Sophie tilted her head, looking at me with an expression of pure innocence. Caleb, you're not going to ghost me, are you? You were the one who wouldn't let me go last night. Then again, you didn't take responsibility last time either. You just ran off to another country. If I hadn't gone and found you, you probably would have never dared to come back. She tugged at the fallen comforter, her tone slightly resentful, but her eyes were shining. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Last night, I didn't do anything. Out of line, did I? I asked tentatively, my voice hoarse. Sophie suddenly leaned in, so close I could see her long eyelashes. Her faint scent washed over me, subtly overlapping with the vague fragrance from my memory. Sophie's eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't answer right away. She just maintained that extreme proximity, her breath ghosting over my skin, as if weighing her words. Out of line, she finally said, her voice a low whisper, raspy with sleep, but every word clear. Caleb, what do you consider out of line? Her words were like a feather brushing against my heart. Combined with the sensual scene before me, my self-control was about to snap. I forced myself to back away, creating a safe distance. I blacked out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My eyes swept over the messy bed and the clothes strewn on the floor, finally returning to her face. If I was offensive in any way, I apologize. Sophie suddenly laughed, not her usual bell-like laugh, but something softer, quieter, with an unreadable undertone. She pulled the comforter up, wrapping herself in it, leaving only her bright face exposed. No need to apologize, she said, tilting her head, her gaze like a tiny hook. You just have to remember to take responsibility. Responsibility? I didn't respond. The air froze. Seeing my tense expression, she suddenly burst out laughing. Just kidding. Look how scared you are. She threw off the covers, got up nonchalantly, and picked her dress up off the floor, heading for the bathroom. Her graceful, naked back swayed in front of me. You were dead drunk last night, and threw up all over yourself. I was just being nice and staying to take care of you. At the bathroom door, she stopped and turned her head halfway. The light outlined her elegant jawline, her tone returning to its usual brightness. But Caleb, some things you can't run away from. The bathroom door clicked shut, and the sound of running water soon followed. I sat alone on the bed, my mind a tangled mess. Her words were contradictory, her attitude ambiguous. Was it a joke, or some kind of declaration? The water stopped. The bathroom door opened, and steam billowed out. Sophie, wrapped in a bathrobe, was drying her wet hair with a towel, her cheeks flushed from the heat. She glanced at me, her tone as natural as if she were discussing the weather. Caleb, go take a shower. You reek of alcohol. I had room service take your clothes to be cleaned. A fresh set is on the sofa. Only then did I notice a brand new set of men's casual wear on the sofa, right down to the underwear in my exact size. This level of thoughtfulness sent an odd pang through me. I mumbled an acknowledgement and practically fled into the bathroom. The warm water washed over me, tried to rinse away the hangover and the chaos in my head. Sophie's words echoed in my ears. Take responsibility. Just kidding. Can't run away from. Which parts were true and which were false? I suspected something might have happened last time, too. I turned off the faucet, and the bathroom fell silent. I was drying my hair when I pushed the door open. Sophie was already dressed in a women's version of the new outfit from the sofa, just in a different color. Seeing me, she looked me up and down with open admiration. I put on the clothes. The fabric was still crisp and new. Sophie walked over and naturally straightened my collar. Perfect fit. She looked up at me and smiled, her eyes clear, as if the hooked gaze from before had just been my imagination. There were only the two of us in the elevator. She stood very close, her arm brushing against mine. Caleb, she said, looking at the changing numbers, her tone casual, you were talking in your sleep last night. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face impassive. What did I say? You called out my name. She turned, revealing a happy, sweet smile. Did I? I don't remember at all. I had zero memory of it. Was I trying to stop you from making me drink? Sophie's lips curled into a smile. I wasn't pushing drinks on you last night. In the restaurant, Claire was already sitting in her usual spot. The morning light streamed through the glass, outlining her in a soft halo. 3 place settings were on the table, and steam rose from the coffee cup beside her. When she saw us walking together, she looked up, her gaze lingering for a moment on our matching outfits. Her expression was as placid as the surface of a deep pool. After the meal, we went to the company together. Julian Vance was standing at his office door, still holding that thermos. He saw the 3 of us together, and his expression darkened for a moment. But he quickly composed himself, giving the sisters a gentle smile. Claire, Sophie, I made a chicken soup with yam and poria today. It's good for digestion. Thanks, Julian, but we already ate, Sophie said with a smile, linking her arm through mine. Caleb treated us. We're stuffed. Her gesture was natural, but carried a clear message of declaration. Julian's smile froze for an instant. His gaze fell on my face. He nodded without another word and turned back into his office. The entire day, Sophie was unusually animated. She found all sorts of excuses to come to my desk to discuss work, her voice softer and sweeter than usual. In the afternoon, she even moved a chair and sat right next to me. The faint scent of her perfume drifted over constantly, and physical contact became more frequent. Under Sophie's influence, the project's progress started to deviate. We absolutely had to finish the work tonight. I was working overtime, and to my surprise, she chose to stay behind as well. The cavernous office was silent except for the sound of keyboards and the hum of the air conditioning. Sophie was wearing a professional blouse and skirt today, with gold-rimmed glasses, looking intently at her screen. When she occasionally got up to discuss details, her body would form all sorts of sexy curves. Her collar was slightly open, making me feel like I had walked into a certain kind of movie. It was unsettling. She really knew what she was doing. At midnight, I finally sent out the last report. Sophie closed her laptop at almost the same moment. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Sometime during the night, a massive thunderstorm had started outside. I hadn't even noticed. Caleb, maybe we shouldn't go home tonight? Sophie suddenly moved closer, a smirk playing on her lips. Why? I picked up my phone. The ride-sharing app showed a queue of over 20 people. It's not going to be easy to get a ride at this hour, Sophie said, walking over to my side and leaning down naturally to look at my phone screen. Besides, I stayed up this late with you. Don't you get the hint? The fluorescent lights were stark, outlining Sophie's profile. Her form-fitting office attire, in the dead of night, was indeed prone to stirring the imagination. She toyed with the gold-rimmed glasses in her hand, her eyes holding a confident, almost provocative smile. Caleb, this is a rare opportunity. Her voice was a low whisper, like a feather brushing against my eardrum. I leaned back in my chair, looking at her. I didn't respond, just raised an eyebrow slightly. I hadn't expected her to choose this moment, this method, to more or less lay her cards on the table. Truthfully, I liked her too, but I was afraid. I didn't want to hurt her. That night back in college, because of Kenji Tanaka's disgusting actions, hadn't I hurt her already? That night of blossoming cherry blossoms had left a deep mark on both of us. Without a word of goodbye, I had boarded a plane and left. Pulling my thoughts back to the present, the rain is heavy, it'll be hard to get a ride. I stated the fact, my tone calm. My gaze swept over her face, so close to mine, lingered for a second on the deep V of her collar, then naturally moved away to the dark, rainy night outside the window. Looks like we'll have to find a place to stay. Sophie seemed a little surprised by my reaction. Perhaps she had expected me to be more flustered. She straightened up, tilted her head, and smiled slyly. I know a great hotel nearby. We can walk. The hotel she mentioned was indeed not far, a stylish boutique hotel. But in the pouring rain, we both got completely soaked. When we checked in, she very naturally booked a single king room. The receptionist's eyes darted between us for a moment before she handed over the key card with a professional smile. Walking into the room, the atmosphere immediately turned ambiguous. Warm lighting, a soft carpet, and a large king-size bed in the center, unusually conspicuous. The air was filled with the hotel's signature fragrance. Rain dripped from our hair, creating dark spots on the carpet. Sophie's white shirt was soaked, nearly transparent, clinging to her skin and outlining a tempting figure. She didn't seem to mind my gaze at all, even shaking her wet hair as if showing off a prize. The atmosphere hung thick for a few seconds. Sophie suddenly lunged forward, throwing her arms around me in a tight embrace. Our soaked clothes stuck to our skin, the chill quickly replaced by body heat. Actions replaced words. Her kiss was clumsy, almost frantic, less like a kiss and more like a declaration of ownership. I responded to her, my hands pressing against her wet back, clearly feeling the thin strap of her bra beneath the shirt. One by one, our wet clothes fell to the carpet. This time, you're not getting away, Caleb. This was a game for adults. Not many words were needed. I wrapped an arm around her waist, lifted her into my arms, and walked toward the bathroom. Overlapping silhouettes appeared on the frosted glass. Hot water poured down, and steam instantly blurred the partition. From the bathroom to the bed, Sophie clung to me like a vine, her passion carrying a desperate, all-or-nothing resolve. In the darkness, sight was deprived, but all other senses were magnified. Sophie was no longer the playful, sly girl from our college days. She became direct, fervent. Caleb Hayes, she called me by my full name for the first time, her voice breaking between moans. This time, you're never running away again. I didn't answer, but my actions spoke with unquestionable authority. By the time we were exhausted, the rain outside still hadn't stopped. Sophie picked up her phone and requested a 2-day leave of absence for us. As the rain subsided, the sky began to lighten. Exhausted again, we fell asleep in the dawn light. When we woke up, it was already afternoon. I invited Sophie to another round. Sophie was lying on top of me, her fingers drawing idle circles on my chest. A thin blanket covered us, our entangled limbs still bearing the marks of our indulgence. Hungry, I brushed the sweat-dampened hair from her temple, my voice raspy. She lifted her face, her eyes shining with an astonishing brightness, a look of pure, satisfied fulfillment. Room service. I reached for the internal phone on the nightstand and ordered enough food for two. When I hung up, Sophie had already propped herself up. The thin blanket slid from her shoulders, revealing a large expanse of pale skin and faint red marks. She didn't shy away from my gaze, even looking a little proud. Caleb Hayes, she said my full name again, her fingertip tapping my chest. You're mine now. I caught her restless hand and nodded. The food arrived quickly. We sat by the window at a small round table, wrapped in bathrobes, eating. Sophie was in a great mood. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the fine hairs on her cheeks. Julian's going to be heartbroken if he finds out, I said, swallowing a piece of steak, my tone casual. Sophie pouted, her voice laced with unconcealed disdain. That's just wishful thinking on the part of the older generation. My sister doesn't even give him the time of day. She leaned closer, her voice low, a strange light in her eyes. Besides, he can't even tell me and my sister apart. The hand holding my coffee cup paused, almost imperceptibly. The 2-day vacation was more like a short honeymoon. Except for 1 hour when Sophie had to leave for some personal business, we were practically glued together in that hotel room. Back at the company, some things had intangibly changed. My relationship with Sophie wasn't officially announced, but the invisible intimacy was hard to hide completely. She no longer made up excuses, instead invading my workspace more naturally. The young female colleagues in the company were gradually transferred away. Our coworkers seemed to notice something was up, but no one said anything. Only Julian. The look he gave me grew more complex, a mixture of disappointment, resignation, and a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Pity? Pity for what? I couldn't be bothered to figure it out. The project was successfully completed. The company decided to hold a small celebration dinner at a high-end restaurant. We sat at a long table covered with a white cloth. Sophie and I sat next to each other. She deliberately slipped off her shoe and gently brushed my calf with her toes. The movement was quick, light, and secretly intimate. My body tensed. I looked at her. She was looking down, sipping her juice, the picture of innocence, as if it had just been my imagination. This woman, Claire, sat across from us, elegantly cutting her steak, occasionally looking up, her calm gaze sweeping over us. Julian was there, of course, but he looked miserable. The successful completion of this project is thanks to everyone's hard work, the general manager said, raising his glass, his eyes lingering on me for a moment. I raised my glass in a humble response, feeling Sophie's proud gaze from beside me. After a few drinks, the atmosphere became lively. Sophie got up to go to the restroom. Shortly after, Claire also elegantly wiped her mouth and left the table. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the office chatter, my fingers idly twirling my wine glass. The conversation gradually shifted, and I threw in a few token comments. After a while, Sophie returned first. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and she wore a sly smile. "What? Is there something on my face?" she asked, her tone natural. "No." I pulled my gaze back and replied with a smile. "I was just thinking you look especially beautiful tonight." She pouted and raised an eyebrow. "So, I'm not pretty usually? You're always beautiful. Tonight, you're dazzling," I responded smoothly. Just then, Claire also returned. She sat down quietly, her gaze sweeping over us without any extra expression. The celebration dinner was winding down. People started discussing what to do next. A colleague suggested going to the bar downstairs for another round. "Caleb and I won't be going," Sophie said, naturally linking her arm with mine, her body leaning slightly against me. "We have other plans." Her words drew a round of knowing laughter and teasing. Only Julian looked dejected, downing the wine in his glass in one gulp. Leaving the restaurant, the evening breeze was cool. Sophie held my arm tightly, humming a tuneless melody. "Where to next?" I asked, looking down at her. She stopped, a smile playing on her lips as she pretended to think. "Home," she said, her expression focused and serious. Our home, Sophie's so-called home, was a high-end apartment she had purchased near the company a while ago. It wasn't large, but it was exquisitely decorated with a sweeping view of the city skyline. She keyed in the passcode and opened the door. The motion sensor light in the foyer flickered on. "Welcome home, Caleb." She turned, leaning back against the entryway cabinet, and looked up at me, her eyes filled with stars. I bent down, swept her up into my arms, and walked into the living room. We didn't turn on the lights. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows on the floor. I placed her on the soft wool rug in the center of the living room. Sophie fell back gracefully, her long hair fanning out like unfurling black silk. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with an unconcealed desire and a deeper, almost stubborn possessiveness. I knelt beside her, leaning down. The kiss landed. She responded passionately, her arms winding around my neck like snakes, pulling me closer. We tangled on the rug, two vines desperate for each other's nourishment. The city's noise was shut out, leaving only the blush-inducing symphony of our own making. In this intimate game, Sophie was at times bold and proactive, at others shy and yielding. She leaned close to my earlobe, her breath like an orchid. "Caleb Hayes, you're mine." Her tone was playful, yet it held an undeniable declaration. I answered with a deeper movement, turning her unfinished words into broken whimpers. In the throes of passion, a familiar, almost crazed obsession flashed in her eyes. The moment the dam broke, the white swan arched its long neck, letting out a silent cry. Afterward, she got up and walked barefoot to the kitchen island to pour a glass of water. Her silhouette was a graceful curve against the night. I closed my eyes, a faint, unnoticeable smile on my lips. Life seemed to hit fast forward. My relationship with Sophie became an open secret at the office. She had me move into her apartment under the guise of conserving resources and facilitating communication. Living together was more structured than I had imagined. Sophie seemed to have a great passion for raising me. Breakfast was different every day of the week. She even insisted on tying my tie for me. She'd stand in front of me, her fingers flying deftly, her focus as intense as if she were creating a work of art. This meticulous care carried a quiet sense of control, but I was happy to accept it. On weekends, we would go to the Sterling family's estate in Greenwich. Mr. Sterling was kind, and her parents were open-minded. They were warm towards me, their daughter's choice of boyfriend. But upon closer inspection, their expressions always held a certain unreadable complexity, especially her mother. Her eyes would often dart between Sophie and me, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Julian was often there too, attending family gatherings as the Sterling's adopted son. He had toned it down a lot, no longer obviously gluing his gaze to the sisters. He would just quietly help out or play chess with Mr. Sterling. Only occasionally, when Sophie and I were being affectionate, could I feel a wave of suppressed disappointment and helplessness from his direction. He was a good guy. Unfortunately, you can't force matters of the heart. This day I was standing at the open kitchen's island making coffee. The rich aroma of Arabica beans filled the air. My phone rang. It was my good friend, Wyatt O'Connell. He had looked into the tax issue. It turned out a former employee had colluded with the supplier to get kickbacks. But due to a work error, he was fired before he could pull it off, presumably because the company needed to make a spot for me. He contacted the supplier to get his promise cut, but they refused. In a fit of anger, he reported them. Wyatt sent me the files he'd found. As I hung up, Sophie emerged from the bedroom, wearing nothing but my white button-down shirt, the hem just barely covering her, her long legs bare. She looked like a lazy cat. She hugged me from behind, her cheek pressed against my back. "Smells good," she murmured, and I couldn't tell if she meant the coffee or me. I patted the hands wrapped around my waist. "Go sit down, it's almost ready." She rubbed her face against my back a couple more times before reluctantly letting go and hopping onto a bar stool, resting her chin in her hands as she watched me. I handed her the freshly brewed coffee with a double shot of milk and no sugar, just how she liked it. She took small sips, her eyes bright and sparkling, following my every move. "Honey," she said suddenly, her tone carrying a hint of casual probing, "have you noticed anything different about me lately?" My hand holding my coffee cup paused. I looked up at her. In the morning light, her face was fresh and lovely. But deep in her eyes, there seemed to be a flicker of something I couldn't quite catch, a quietness different from her usual liveliness. I put down my cup and walked around the island to stand in front of her. I braced my hands on the bar stool on either side of her, trapping her. "Yeah, you are different," I said, leaning in close, my eyes carefully tracing her features, my tone serious. Her breath hitched, her eyes darting nervously. Where am I different?" I smirked, my thumb gently brushing her lower lip, my voice dropping to a low whisper. "You're more and more captivating." "Does that count?" Sophie's face turned red, the blush spreading all the way to her ears. She gave me a playful shove, but her eyes instantly lit up, the brief moment of quietness vanishing as if it were never there. "You silver-tongued devil." She hopped off the stool and scurried back to the bedroom like a startled deer. "I'm going to get changed." I watched her go, smiled, and turned to wash the coffee mugs. Sophie said she wanted to document our lives. The number of security cameras in the apartment started to increase. She said that as lovers, we should be completely open with each other. She installed tracking software on both our phones. "This way I can always find you, and you can always see where I am." "Isn't that great?" she said, her eyes shining with a pure, unquestionable satisfaction. I smiled and pinched her cheek. "Okay, but doesn't that mean I won't have any secrets?" "You don't need secrets." She leaned in and gave me a light peck on the lips, her tone half joking, half serious. "You just need me. And if some little temptress tries to steal you away, I need to know where to go to get you back." After that, Sophie became even clingier. She started casually, adding her fingerprint to my phone's security. "This way, if you get drunk, I can call you a ride," she'd say, blinking innocently, her reasoning sound. She would also, by the way, check my work chats while keeping me company during overtime, under the guise of learning business communication skills. I let her, sometimes even handing her the phone myself. "Any suspicious targets?" She would glare at me playfully, but a smile would tug at her lips. This pathologically possessive behavior, when done by her, somehow came across as charmingly cute. If there was a conversation with another woman, she would get pouty, and then we would inevitably have to act out a scene from an office romance. On the desk, in the conference room, the finance office, the bathroom. The project entered a new phase, and I became incredibly busy. After several consecutive days of overtime, my eyes were bloodshot. Sophie complained that I was spending less time with her, but she remained the same meticulous caretaker. Every night, she would bring a carefully prepared late-night snack to the office to keep me company and wait for me to go home with her. Tonight, I finally finished the last proposal. I looked up and stretched my stiff neck, only to find Sophie asleep at the desk across from mine. I walked over quietly, intending to drape my jacket over her. As I got closer, I caught a cold, sharp scent from her hair. I paused for a moment, but quickly resumed my natural movement, gently placing the jacket on her. Then I bent down to pick her up and take her home. The moment my arm slipped under her knees, she woke up. Her eyes were momentarily hazy, but they quickly focused, blooming with that familiar, dependent, and playful smile. "Honey, are you done?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleep. She naturally wrapped her arms around my neck and nuzzled my neck. "So sleepy. Let's go home." "Yeah, let's go home." I lifted her into my arms and turned off the office lights. It was a rare, quiet weekend. We were curled up in the apartment, watching an old movie. The screen flickered with changing lights and shadows as the main characters argued intensely in the rain. Sophie was nestled on the sofa, her head on my lap, my fingers idly combing through her long hair. The movie reached its climax. The female lead said, "I don't love you anymore," and turned to leave. The male lead stood there, devastated. Sophie suddenly shifted, turning over to look up at me. "Honey," she said. Her tone was casual, but her fingertips were unconsciously twisting the hem of my shirt. "If one day you betrayed me, I wouldn't just turn and walk away like some pathetic loser." As she spoke, a strange smile crept onto her face. "I would lock you up, so you could never betray me again." I looked down, meeting her gaze. I gently squeezed her cheek and chuckled. "Betrayal? Not a chance." She stared at me, blinked, and then a satisfied smile spread across her face. She snuggled back into my embrace, burying her face in my side. In the movie, the couple, after much hardship, finally reunited in a loving embrace. It turned out to be one of those cheesy romance movies with a grand gesture at the end. But us holding each other on the sofa seemed even more inseparable than the movie's happy ending. The quarterly team-building event was held at a hot springs resort in the suburbs. We could choose our own rooms. Sophie and I naturally took a private villa with its own outdoor hot spring pool. At night, the valley was silent except for the occasional chirp of insects. Steam rose from the hot spring pool. Sophie wore a daring swimsuit. Soaking in the pool, only her shoulders were visible, her cheeks flushed from the heat. I leaned against the edge of the pool, watching her. The ripples in the water made the curves of her body appear and disappear. She seemed a bit shy, keeping her head down, playing with the flower petals on the water surface. "Come here," I said, reaching out my hand to her. She hesitated for a moment before slowly moving towards me. The water temperature was perfect, and the touch of our skin sent a shiver through me. I wrapped my arm around her waist, pulling her to the edge of the pool, her back against the cool stone wall. The steam blurred our vision. I leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was infused with the heat of the spring and the darkness of the valley, making it more lingering than usual. She could feel the change in my body and gently pushed against me, her voice moist with steam. "Not here. Let's go back to the room." "Okay," I agreed, but my actions didn't stop, my kisses tracing a path down her neck. She tilted her head back, her breathing becoming rapid, her fingers unconsciously gripping my arm. Under the moonlight, passion took over. The morning after the hot spring night, the valley was filled with the crisp songs of birds. When I woke up, the person beside me was still sound asleep, her breathing even. I got up quietly, put on a robe, and walked out to the patio. The wooden deck was still damp with morning dew. The water in the hot spring pool from last night had calmed, reflecting the blue sky. I heard light footsteps behind me, a pair of arms wrapped around my waist from behind, a warm body pressing against me. "Why are you up so early?" Her voice was lazy from sleep, and she nuzzled my back. "I woke up and you weren't there." Her tone was tinged with dependence. I covered her hands with mine. Her fingertips were cool. "You were sleeping so soundly, I didn't want to wake you." I turned and pulled her into my embrace, wrapping my robe around her thin frame. "It's chilly in the morning. Don't catch a cold." She looked up at me, her eyes clear, with a hint of playfulness. "Honey, will you marry me?" I leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. "Yes." I lifted her into my arms and carried her back inside. "We haven't had breakfast yet," she protested softly, but her arms tightened around my neck. After hearing the news of our engagement, the Sterling family took over all the preparations, giving my parents a welcome break. Sophie became busy too. She seemed to enjoy the hustle, wanting to personally oversee every detail. The week before the wedding, Sophie suggested a short trip to relax. The destination was the same hot springs resort from the team building event. She said she wanted to relive the experience. She booked the most private room. At night, steam rose from the outdoor hot spring pool. Looking up, we could see a sprinkling of stars. The warm water soothed our skin. She leaned against me, her back pressed against my chest, my arms naturally wrapped around her waist. Nervous? I whispered, my lips against her ear. Nervous about what? Her voice was moist with steam, a little muffled. The wedding. She was silent for a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. What's there to be nervous about? It's not like. You can run away. She turned to face me. The rippling water pressed our bodies close together. Caleb Hayes, she said my full name, her fingers, wet with spring water, tracing my face. Say you love me. I took her hand and brought it to my lips, kissing it. I love you. Her fingertips trembled slightly. Only me, she pressed. I looked into her eyes, where the stubbornness and insecurity were almost overflowing. I leaned down and kissed her, answering her with a deep and lingering kiss. The water lapped around us. The stars watched in silence. When the kiss ended, she rested in my arms, breathing lightly. I stroked her back, my voice low. This life, and the next, I will only love you. Julian Vance left. On the morning of our wedding, I heard he took only a small suitcase and bought a ticket for the earliest flight north. No advice. He vanished like a silent wind. The wedding was grand and perfect. During the toasts, even Claire set aside her usual coolness, standing by with a smile, holding a glass of wine, supporting her sister. Sophie, in a traditional, form-fitting cheongsam that accentuated her curves, stayed by my side, handling the guests with grace. She held my arm, greeting guests from all walks of life, her smile perfect, her demeanor elegant. We stood together, accepting everyone's blessings. After the wedding, Sophie managed our lives with meticulous order. We rarely went back to the Sterling estate. It seemed that after the grand wedding, we both tacitly wanted a space that was entirely our own. Her cleansing of my social circle also seemed to have concluded. At the office, apart from necessary work interactions, almost no female colleagues would initiate a conversation with me. I was happy for the peace and quiet, focusing on my career. My position and salary both rose steadily. Everything was good, flawless. That afternoon, I spent a little extra time discussing a design issue for a project with a new female designer. The girl was a recent graduate, full of energy and creative ideas. We debated a difficult design point for over half an hour before finally finding a solution. The girl breathed a sigh of relief, a bright smile on her face. Mr. Hayes, I learned so much from discussing this with you. Can I come to you again if I have more questions? I smiled, gathering the documents on my desk. Of course. Feel free to ask about work-related issues anytime. It was just a perfectly normal work conversation. The next day, I noticed that the female designer I had been talking to wasn't at work. Colleagues whispered that she had taken leave for a family emergency. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has emergencies. Besides, we weren't in the same department. A few days passed like this. The girl never showed up. Calling her cell phone went straight to a number-disconnected message. That evening, after dinner, Sophie and I were watching TV on the sofa. A news report about a missing person case came on. The missing person was a young woman. I recognized her at once. It was the girl from the office. The news continued with updates on the case. The girl's clothes and personal belongings had been found in an abandoned factory in the suburbs. But there was still no trace of her. The police had launched an investigation, suspecting foul play. They appealed to the public for any leads. With a somber tone, the news anchor also mentioned a long unsolved cold case. 2 years ago, a Japanese international student named Kenji Tanaka had disappeared under similar circumstances. His case remained unsolved, with no leads to this day. I turned my head. Sophie's lips were curved into a slight, indescribable, almost satisfied and eerie smile. It was like a flower of evil blooming quietly in the dark, exuding a dangerous and sickly sweet aura. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Sophie seemed to sense my gaze. She turned off the TV and turned to me, naturally snuggling into my embrace. She looked up and asked, "What's wrong, honey? You look pale. Are you too tired from work?" Her voice was soft, her eyes clear. It was as if that momentary abnormality was just a figment of my imagination, brought on by the news report. It's nothing. Maybe I'm just a little tired. Seeing news like this is just unsettling. I know, right? It's so scary.